Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. I've got an exciting video for you today. This is going to be a very interesting finish. It's that one where you put a paint job over a paint job and then relic it, like a double relic or a relic reveal or something. There's got to be a word for this. Let me know what it is if you know, so that I can title this video appropriately. Yeah, I legitimately don't know what this is called. If it's nothing else, maybe we can like start the hashtag double relic trending or something like that. But yeah, we're doing a paint job over top of this paint job, and then we're going to do a partial reveal. I get actually quite a few questions about how to do this. And for relic finishes, everyone classically thinks, of course, it's got to be lacquer. So you do a lacquer paint job and then you try and put another lacquer paint job over it, but nitrocellulose lacquer melts into itself. So that's a problem. It's okay though. I'm going to show you in this video how to get that separated properly. In fact, it's pretty straightforward. You need two different kinds of paint. The two colors that we're using for this one are actually reasonably similar. I'm going for an interesting effect with the two of them stacked on top of each other, but you often do see this with like a, a Pelham blue on top of a burst or something. Anyway, I'm going to stop trying to come up with examples. What we have here, you will hopefully remember, is a guitar that's already coated. This one's painted in the Calypso Blue from Duplicolor, which is an acrylic lacquer. That doesn't really matter. What's over top of it is an automotive polyurethane. This is a catalyzed polyurethane. So I painted this guitar in these colors in my two-part video series. What the heck did I call that? Hang on. I've had too many concussions. It was a two-part series. If you look up awesome finish with Duplicolor in 2K, you'll find it. 2K, it means two component. I know components spelled with a C. I don't need anybody else to tell me that. It's 2K. 2K paint is the clear that we used on here. So that's a 2K polyurethane, a two-part polyurethane. And what that's going to allow us to do is paint over this with lacquer. And when we go to separate them after, when we go to do our relic work, not only are we not going to have that melting between the two because they're different types of paint, and this stuff doesn't do that. It cures instead of just drying. But also, this is considerably more durable. This is a much harder finish, and it's thicker. So we're going to have some room to work. We're going to be able to get down through that lacquer without immediately removing this stuff. That's how we're going to do our reveal. This hashtag may actually not make any sense because I don't know if I'm going to actually relic the poly. That's one thing to be aware of. It's very difficult to relic poly. It's not... Well, it doesn't relic. It doesn't really age, so it's tough to make it look convincing. Here's the lacquer that we're going to use. You guys saw me show you this. We haven't demoed it yet, so we're going to test it out here. This is the Daphne Blue. That's what I'm going with. So I'm going Daphne Blue, classic lacquer color over top of my Calypso Blue guitar. This is from Oxford Guitar Supply Co. We've talked about this in a prior video. These guys are only available in Canada, these specific cans. They're out of Ontario, but I'm hoping that they will be available in the States soon. We seem to be generating a little interest in them. If that continues to escalate, then hey, maybe they'll be available in the States promptly. I suspect that it's going to matter how well these perform. So we're going to test them out at the same time. We're going to test out this Daphne Blue on this paint job. Before we go any further here, I will have a link in the description for these. If you're in Canada and you're looking for classic Fender colors, that kind of stuff, classic nitrocellulose paints, these are vintage formula. Feel free to check that out. If you do purchase anything from there, there's a little thing that says, how did you find out about us? I'd appreciate it if you mention me in there. Helps me out, and it'll help me hopefully continue my relationship with this company because I'm pretty excited to be working with their stuff. Moving on. First things first, we need to scuff this up. This is a high gloss finish. It's polished, or it's a relatively high gloss finish. I did some experimenting on it in another video. But we do want, even though we want to be able to remove paint, we do want the paint to stick to it. And the paint's not going to stick if we have this plasticky high gloss. So I'm just going to use some red Scotch-Brite. You can also use some 800 grit sandpaper. Both of those options work fine. And I'm going to scuff this guy up all over to make sure that the lacquer has something to grip onto. After that, it's going to be a simple matter of cleaning it with some waxy grease remover and getting it onto my stand so that I can go ahead and spray it. And so that's going to be stage one here. We're prepping this, and prepping simply involves scuffing it down and cleaning it. And then stage two of the process is going to be spraying it. We'll cover that in this video as well. And then I'll see how long this is. We might also move right into the relicing. If not, we will cover that in a part 2. We interrupt today's program to bring you a special message from our sponsors. Yeah, we've got a sponsor for this video, so that's new. Anyway, today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online kind of tutorial database with a whole bunch of creators on it, and they've got a subscription service, and yeah, it's pretty cool. I know you guys like tutorials, hence you probably being here. So if you're interested in that, there is a link in the description. They've got a variety of topics, including illustration, which I'm planning on checking out so I can do some like drawing on guitars again. I've done one video on that. Pretty cool stuff. Music, I may actually learn how to play guitar at some point. Don't count on it though. Film and video, I should probably figure that one out one of these days. Productivity, we could all probably use a little bit more productivity. Marketing, entrepreneurship, there's a bunch of stuff on there that I'm gonna probably spend some time on. So if you guys are at all interested in that, like I said, there is a link in the description below. If you go through there, it lets them know that I accomplished something, and that would be really cool. I will say one more thing before we jump back to my tutorial of the guitar. Unlike YouTube, not just anybody can upload on Skillshare, there's some quality control. So I hate to say it, but there are some bad tutorials out there on YouTube for people who don't know what they're doing. Hey, I probably made a few of them. That's not a great joke, is it? Never mind. Anyway, Skillshare has, yeah, some QC going on so that you probably don't have to worry about that. Check it out if you want. Let's get back to painting a guitar. So here's our Calypso color that we're starting with. Like I've said in this video already, 2K poly finish, and it's already scuffed up and ready to go. So you can see it didn't have that high gloss sheen. There's our Oxford nitrocellulose lacquer that we're going to put on. Make sure you shake these cans well. There's a fair bit of pigment in them, and you want to make sure that they're well agitated. There's a little ball in there. You should feel that moving around, hear it moving around for about a minute before you spray. As always, be sure to protect yourselves. If you don't have a respirator, get one. If you're looking for one, I have a couple in the link in the description, the Amazon link. If you pick something up through there, helps me out. So you can see that I'm applying this lightly to begin with, and you'll see it kind of has a mottled look. It doesn't go on in one smooth coat. That's unlike some of the other paint types. When you're spraying lacquer, nitrocellulose lacquer in particular, this is kind of the technique that I recommend that you use, and I got this both from practice and research, and also from watching a guy who works for a Fender custom shop do his gun work. So this is how I spray with a gun as well, and you'll have seen that in my most recent nitrocellulose paint job that I did with a gun if you watched that series. Anyway, this stuff dries super fast, so you're going to see me, I'm touching the, not actually on the guitar, but where I've got that neck thing in there to hold it in place. That's probably a minute after I spray this, maybe even 30 seconds. It's dry to the touch, so I move on and go ahead and put on another coat, and I'm using the same technique, and you'll see here on the second coat, it starts to look really nice and even. So it doesn't take a ton of them. It goes on a little quicker than that acrylic, that auto wear acrylic, which is also a very fast paint that's applied in a very similar way. But anyway, another really light coat on here, just on top of the previous one. I'm going to go just a hair heavier, but you'll see that it really starts to look nice and even, and that color starts to come through properly here. You can also see exactly how fast I'm spraying here. This is all in real time. It's not sped up or anything. So if it looks faster than you would expect, well, it's not. That's the speed that I'm spraying this stuff at. That does tend to change a little bit depending on how close to the piece you are with your can. I generally hold mine just a touch closer than most people, and I move a little quicker. That's a matter of personal preference, but still, this stuff goes on quick and light. Just like this. I'm going to do one more quick spray. This is again about 30 seconds later. You can see I'm going all the way off the sides of the piece when I spray, and I'm actually stopping the paint, but you don't necessarily have to do that. It's just a waste to spray paint off the sides. So that's my technique. If you haven't seen it, I always recommend people check out my video on how to get an even coat of paint with spray cans. It might be helpful for you. There's a little bit of texture in here. That's partially because I'm applying it lightly, and partially because that's just kind of how things go. But this stuff actually lays out really nicely. Even with the booth, I've got a touch of dust, but oh well. Here is what we're going to be using to do our Relic piece. So a little bit of sandpaper. I don't think I actually end up using. The steel wool is helpful. I'll show you why. But the key elements are that curved X-Acto blade and this lacquer thinner. Once that 2K poly finish underneath is cured, it doesn't get dissolved again. So solvents like lacquer thinner can't really hurt it at all. The lacquer, on the other hand, well, as we've talked about in a previous video, lacquer never cures. It only dries, which means that it can always be wetted again, for lack of a better way of putting it, with the solvent that's already in it. So lacquer thinner can remove it. Lacquer thinner can cause it to reform a sprayable liquid, actually, if you want it to for some reason. And in this case, it makes it very easy to take it off. This is about, I think, a week or two after I sprayed this that I'm coming back to this. I know it's immediately in the video, but I'm wearing a different shirt, don't worry. So yeah, this is about a week or two. And you don't want to go too wet on this because it will dissolve a whole bunch of paint if you do. You just put a little bit on and then alternate kind of between the wet area of your rag and the dry area. And you don't have to add a whole bunch more lacquer thinner on there very frequently because this stuff generally makes it come off pretty quickly. You'll see in a couple minutes here I switched to using a Q-tip to do some detail work, and I alternate between one side of the Q-tip with lacquer thinner on it and one side that is dry. But we'll get to that in a moment. For now, I'm doing the bigger areas, and I'm just doing them, like you can see here, with a little shop towel, basically a paper towel, and wiping off lacquer carefully to get the effect that I want. When you do this, it will leave a bit of a lacquer haze behind, but that's fine. We can come back and clean that up after, just carefully using the exact same technique pretty much. The blade is going to allow me to get sharper edges, so using the lacquer thinner and the cloth or something like that kind of gives that hazy, rubbed away look, which is fine. You know, that's one of the techniques that you're going to want to use and one of the effects you're probably going to want to go for. But the blade gives a completely different effect. It gives a scratched off, kind of more damaged look. So the kind of thing that comes from actual wear and tear and impact instead of just, this is where my hand and or my arm have been rubbing for the last 20 years, you know? So if you want to create like a little jagged edge, or in areas where you're doing these small damage pieces, sometimes the blade makes more sense. Make sure you're using a curved blade. Well, I shouldn't say that. You can use a straight one if you want. I like to use a curved one because it avoids gouging. I use the curved portion of the blade, and I know that the curve in the blade is going to mean that I get kind of a smooth transition back from the poly to the lacquer instead of just creating, well, for lack of a better way of putting it, instead of just creating little gougy scratches. So it's kind of a happy medium between a straight blade and this other technique where I'm blending into the lacquer a little bit by using the thinner. I don't want really rough transitions on here physically, so that's why I use this type of technique. I don't want to really be able to feel these damaged pieces. I just want them to show up in the appearance. So here I'm doing what I was saying before. I'm using a Q-tip. I've got a little bit of lacquer thinner on one side that I'm mostly just using to wet it. And then when you actually see me removing material there, that's with the dry side. That's to avoid, screwing up a bunch of the lacquer that then doesn't end up coming off. So you can see me do the same thing here. I wet a few areas, and then I'm going to come in with the dry side of the Q-tip and just rub off the portion of the lacquer that has been dissolved by the solvent. It's a pretty easy way to get something that kind of resembles little damage marks or burn marks or something to that effect. Next up is the steel wool. This is 4-0 steel wool. You may also want to consider using sandpaper instead. Steel wool works really nicely for this, but it does leave a residue and it's a bit of a pain to clean. So you got to be very careful to go in with the waxing grease remover after and take off all of that residue. Sandpaper, you don't really have that problem, but sandpaper also doesn't mold to these little, rub away spots, I guess, as easily. So what I'm doing here is making sure that everything's well scuffed up with that steel wool, and then easing those transitions so you really can't feel them in the final finish. Here I'm going in with my lacquer thinner again to finish. I did the front face first, and then I wanted to kind of finish around the edge. I've got a weird B-roll shot of some of the stuff that I'm using here because, hey, why not? It seemed like it would look cool. I probably should have put music to this part, but I'm just going to talk instead. So you can see the way that some of those transitions work around those edges. The ones where I've used the lacquer thinner and the steel wool are very smooth. They look rubbed away. The other ones look like just straight up damage. I'm using a similar technique on the back, kind of trying to figure out what areas should be damaged like this, what areas you would think would have these kinds of issues. So, you know, for whoever purportedly would have played this guitar to do this kind of damage, maybe they're wearing shorts, so they got that nonsense going on at the bottom, occasionally playing shirtless to get some rubbed off area in the belly curve where the skin has, you know, caused the lacquer to wear away a little bit, much like with the arm and hand areas in the front. That middle damage piece there, I want that to look like buckle rash. So I'm not going in with the cloth too much because I want it to be a little sharper. But what I'm doing instead is just kind of doing sharp little lines with the Q-tip and then finishing off some of those scratch patterns with the razor blade. Now for the front, I showed all of this work in real time. That was what it actually looked like. That was how fast I was actually doing it. So the lacquer thinner method is very quick, very effective. For the back, this is sped up. And this is, I think, the first point in this video where anything has been sped up at all. So this is 3 times speed just to kind of get us through this so you don't have to watch me do the same thing for 20 minutes or something like that. And once we finish up the back here, we'll get this thing all cleaned up. You can take a look at it, and then we'll move on to, I guess, our last step or our second last, depending on your method. So this is what we're dealing with. We'll talk about what your other potential last step might be kind of in the outro to this video, because this is going to be my last step. I'm going to spray some satin lacquer on here. I don't want to go with a gloss. I don't want this to look brand new. That kind of wouldn't make sense in the circumstances. So I'm going in with the Oxford Satin Clear to give it that kind of vintage, slightly faded look. I'm not doing any yellowing work here, but you can do that with a clear with a little bit of amber to it, or an aged clear. Those are available in spray cans, or you can mix a little amber tint into your own. So similar technique here. I'm laying it on pretty quickly, pretty light. It's a little bit difficult. You're going to see me probably stare at this for a little bit as I spray it. It's a little bit difficult to tell when your satin lacquer is going on even, because as you spray it, it's going to look kind of gloss, and then it'll matte out a little bit as it dries. So it looks shiny just because it's wet, but then it mattes out a little bit. So don't be worried if you're spraying this stuff and it looks like there are wet spots and spots that aren't wet. That's fine. It kind of is going to happen that way. So just try and spray it as evenly as you can and give it a minute before you do anything crazy. Let it flash off, let it dry, and then check if it looks like it went on evenly. You do have to be careful with satin and matte finishes because you can't really polish them after. You can go in and do some polishing work a little bit, and we'll talk about that right at the end of this video. But that's going to gloss it up. So that's a specific technique that you would do, and a specific goal that you would have in mind if you're going to try and do that. That's not just finishing off with a nice even matte or satin finish, which is what I have in mind for this guitar. I want this damage to this Relicing to look good, to look like it's damaged, but I don't want it to feel any different than the rest of the guitar. We're going for a nice uniform sheen, a uniform feel across the entire surface of this thing. Again, I'm using the same technique here. I'm using the same type of spray pattern and everything, and I'm going just as quickly. So this is almost done. You're seeing the clear coating in real time. This is the speed that I do it, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time spraying this guitar, really, at least not for the lacquer pieces, because it's a fast process and a fast product. Just to comment while I'm doing this, you can see these cans spray really nice. They've got a nice little fan pattern to them. The propellant works really well. You saw how nice the pigment went on before. Really pleased with these, actually. So this video wasn't necessarily meant to be a review of the Oxford paints, although I did want to make sure I was testing them out. And I gotta say, I'm happy with them. I think I'm going to be using them quite a bit for this vintage style lacquer, these vintage colors. They're one of the, they've got a great selection for that, and they're one of the better performing lacquer spray cans that I've used. So you can see just a few seconds or a minute or two later, that's what we're left with. A nice even satin sheen, nice kind of vintage look, and yeah, this cool double relic effect, or whatever the heck that's called. I swear I will figure that out at some point. All right, there it is, guys. I think I managed to actually pack all of this into one probably uncomfortably long video, but that should tell you everything you need to know. You can do this over top of, you know, a pre-existing poly finish. You can do your own poly finish like I did on this one. So there are a few videos to watch if you want to see the process from start to finish. Like I said, I've got that part about Duplicolor and 2K that you can use for the background. So that's using the Oxford paints. Performed awesome. I'm really happy with that. As you guys can tell, the blue laid out nicely, very typical nitro finish feel to it. Goes on really thin. It'll kind of pull if you put it on too heavy, but it dries almost immediately. I pulled this out of the paint booth a minute ago, which was precisely when I finished painting it. So it's dry now, but it's going to take a month to fully harden. You can expose, using those techniques, as much of the bottom layer as you want. You can go through the bottom layer to expose wood too, to get like a more aggressive relic look, but because that's poly, you're not going to be able to do it the same way. You're going to have to get very aggressive using probably an abrasive. Some other options exist, like a actual paint stripper or a heat gun for taking off poly, but if you try to do that in this context, you're very, very likely to damage your lacquer further. If you try and take a heat gun to the poly, you're gonna melt off a bunch of lacquer, so be careful, use abrasives, use blades, protect yourself, and yeah, try not to screw it up. That's my motivational speech for the day. This guy has that satin finish on it. You can see it's not too shiny, doesn't, well, it doesn't look brand new, which is kind of the idea. You can go back now after having done this and wait, you know, a couple of weeks for the nitro to dry, or a month for it to dry fully, and then you can come in to these areas that are rubbed down, like that's the look we're going for, and polish them up more as though they've been rubbed smooth. You can also go into these areas like the buckle rash and scrape them up more if that's what you want. I'm looking for a uniform kind of sheen like this. I'm happy with how this turned out, but now you can play with that as well. So now that the colors are all set up, you can play with the sheen, do some work with texture, that sort of thing. I don't know, should I sell this body now? I'm probably not gonna turn this into an actual guitar, but I have a number of other test bodies available to me now, so yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll let you guys know in a while if it's up for sale, but you can always do it yourself. That's the point of these videos, so give it a try. It's not that difficult. The whole job, start to finish, can technically be done with spray cans, and particularly when you're working with nitro, if you've got the spray can in the right color, there's no real advantage to using a gun. In a lot of types of paint, you can get the better quality paints for a gun. You can make them work better. You can lay them out more smoothly. With nitro, not really an issue. These are properly thinned and work well. They propel nicely out of these cans, and you're not going to get a higher quality nitro to put through your gun. That's just not how it works. So you can do it with a spray can. You can probably do it yourself. As always, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any really cool ways for doing this, cool ways for taking your nitro off of the poly underneath to have an awesome effect, or if you think that this should have been done in different areas, let me know. Tell me what's up. Yeah, always happy to get feedback, always happy to get suggestions. You can also go over this with a slightly ambered clear coat to really make it look old, but I didn't want to mess with these colors. I'm happy with them. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe so you can see my other cool paint projects that are coming up. And as always, have a good one. See you next time.